Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. Today, we are reading issue number 124, and just a little catch-up on what's been going on in the last couple issues. John is in America visiting Dani's family, and something is going on. Not just Dani's family, but a lot of people are acting kind of weird. But in Dani's house, all of her family members are arguing. Some of her brothers, who are teenagers, are doing things like pulling guns on other family members and actually shooting it, but luckily not actually hitting anybody. And John has figured out that there's something mystical going on with this. Everybody's acting out of character, and also he's noticed the First of the Fallen has shown up just to mess with him. So John originally thought he was the reason for all this stuff, but the First said it wasn't him, there was someone else doing magic, and if John solved this riddle of his, he might help out. So he asked John, what is a quiz? So John is trying to figure that out right now. He is still stumped at the moment. But in the last issue, he met a man named George, who was a military veteran living at a VA hospital, and John had a drink with him, and this man had said he knew what a quiz was, but we cut away from that before we actually learned what John learned. And in the background, there is a secondary story going on with a man named Gavin and the ghost of his girlfriend named Pam. And I believe this is where the actual magic is coming from, but it has not been confirmed yet. Supposedly, there is a magic book that Gavin has that he may be using to, I don't know, cast a spell or something on John, or maybe the girlfriend, who is some sort of apparition because she's dead, obviously, is not the girlfriend and it is someone else, and they are causing whatever's going on with John and Dani's family. So that is where we left off in the last issue. So first things first, with issue 124, we got the cover. We see John is ducking in fear from something, even though he's got like a lit cigarette, so it must have been he was standing here casual, and then something came out of nowhere, and the something that is flying above looks like colorful shapes of energy that kind of look like abstract birds or bats or something, but they're all different colors, and they're swooping down at him. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Paul Jenkins with art by Warren Pleece. And as we turn to the first page, we see Dani's house, and a new coat of snow has landed on everything, so winter has officially hit big time. We see a snowplow truck going down the road, and we see John sitting on the porch smoking, and over that his narration says, "Over the years, I've come to suspect that every significant historical event somehow begins with two drunken Irishmen making a bet. Recent events being no exception, America's in a clinch. Powerful forces nibble at the collective ears of the bleeding masses. A psychic manipulation is making the colonials even crazier than usual, and curiously, the devil himself does not claim responsibility. Naturally, I can't have that, so throwing common sense to the four winds, I challenge the fucker anyway." "The quiz is this," he replies. "What is a quiz?" Tempted as I am to deck the facile bastard, I decide instead to search for the answer to this puzzle. And right when I'm beginning to lose heart, I ask an old soldier if he knows the meaning of the riddle. Much to my surprise, he says. Then we cut to a flashback of John in the room with George, the veteran, and George is answering his question saying, "As a matter of fact, I do." And then John looks at George kind of annoyed, like he doesn't quite believe him, and he asks, "What's that supposed to mean?" And George answers, "What I said. Yes, I know what a quiz is. Or at least where the word comes from. You think I went to college and learned how to shoot people?" Then we get a flashback to Dublin in the late 1700s, as George recounts where the word quiz came from. So we see Irish gentlemen and women walking in the streets, and some of them are going into a pub, and George's narration over this says, "The word has a pretty unique etymology. It all begins in Dublin in the late 1700s. There's these two drunk Irishmen in a pub, right? So one of them's this local theater manager named Daly. One day, Daly's bragging to his buddy that he can introduce a new word into the English language. "No way," says his pal. So they make a wager on it over a pint of warm beer. That night, Dali pays a bunch of street urchins to write quiz all over the city. I mean, they plaster it everywhere. Walls, schools, houses, you name it. Next day, all of Dublin wakes up to find weird graffiti all over the place with no apparent explanation about what it means. And what these kids who graffitied all over the town did was paint the word quiz on everything. But like Dali said, quiz isn't a word yet, it just means nothing, and it seems Dali just invented this word randomly for them to paint. And George's narration continues. People start talking, and before you know it, quiz is the talk of the town, and Dali wins his bet. Then we cut out of the scenes from the story and back into the room where George is drinking, and he says, what's interesting is that Dali intended for quiz to mean something along the lines, practical joke. He was kind of surprised when people started applying it to mean puzzle. Point is, Dali had absolutely no control over his own creation. His idea took a life of its own. Then George kind of gives a smile as he says this last line. Then we cut back to John on the porch who is remembering that, and he looks out at us smiling and he says, a remarkably stupid concept, mind, but good enough for this friggin' story. So John breaks the fourth wall and then continues with his narration saying, and there you have it. That's why the devil never claimed responsibility for this infernal ad campaign. He didn't administer the poison. He's just getting fat on the results. Like many of the best ideas, it came about by accident. Nobody created it. It sells nothing. The need for it simply outweighs reality. So it comes into being. And it all makes perfect sense. It feeds on our huge appetite for spectacle. But while we overload every neuron in search of the greatest show on earth, the spectacle feeds on us. As the great Barnum said, there's one born every minute. Then we get some flashes of some imagery of different scenes of spectacles going on. So we see a football game happening, and then at a motel, we're seeing someone being carted away in an ambulance. Then we're seeing a preacher praying. Then we're seeing two different groups of sports fans, and they're wearing different colors of gear, but all the gear says it on it instead of a team name. And over these images, the narration says, it's so-called men of God being buggered by transsexual hookers in hotel rooms. It's sad, overindulgent clowns emulating the sad, overindulgent clowns that overdosed before them. It's overpaid cross-dressing athletes chattering like fucking chimpanzees every time they do something average. It's our souls lifting as they attribute their excellence to Jesus, and we empty our wallets in his name. The greater the lie, the more people will believe it. That's what makes it powerful. It fills a need, which is why it must exist. It satisfies people's need to identify, to feel secure, to get something for nothing. But some are affected to a lesser degree. The ones who actually like to go through the process of falling down. And as he says this last line, in talking about people who don't mind going through the process and falling down, we get a panel of Dani skiing down these snow slopes, so I guess that explains why she hasn't really been affected by everything going on. And his narration continues. It's not a matter of watching it on the bloody telly, is it? It's a matter of going out and actually doing it. It's landing on your arse and getting cold and wet and tired and enjoying it. And maybe that's the way you counteract the poison. You introduce a maverick idea. And we see on this page that the name of this issue is Up the Down Staircase Part 4. Then we turn the page and we cut to a darkened room, and there is a phone that's ringing, and next to it on the nightstand are a bunch of pictures of famous people. I believe we see John F. Kennedy and Joseph Stalin, and we can't quite make out the person in the bed, but the person wakes up and answers the phone, and as he does, he stands up naked, and we see that it is Weeble, John's friend who can channel the dead, and as he answers the phone sleepily, he says, this better be good, whoever you are. Do you know what fucking time it is? And weirdly, the person on the other end answers, You have been waiting a long time for mine contact, ja? And Weeble is confused, and he looks at the phone for a second, and then he puts it back to his ear and says, who is this? And the voice replies, I was once known as Schickelgruber. And then all sleepiness leaves the face of Weeble, and he gets very serious, and he says, Schickelgruber? Hitler? Christ almighty! I mean, after all this time and all that, what do you want? Then we cut to a panel of John in America calling from Dani's house, and he is pretending to be Hitler on the phone, and he says, I have been working on a comeback, and I need ein real fat bastard to fill the goring. You interested? And with that, Weeble realizes that it's John, and he says, Constantine, you fucking asswipe. That ain't bloody funny. You know how I feel about the big kraut. Then chuckling, John says, Sorry, Weeb. I couldn't resist. Listen, can I pick your brain for a minute? And Weeble answers, What for? And John answers, 'Cause I'm fed up with picking me nose. And a still sour Weeble says, You should have been a comedian. And John replies, I should have listened in school. Then I'd know more about psychic transference, like you do, mate. Chatting with the dead and all that. How it works. And Weeble says, Well, I've told you before. It's like you pick up on people's memories. Useless bits of their lives that are only relevant to them. Add them up, and you can talk to the source. And John says, That's all well and good, Weeble. But can you do it to someone who's still alive? Then we turn the page, and we cut to Gavin walking in the rain. And Gavin, if you don't remember, is the guy who lost his girlfriend, and he's been moping around. So as he's walking in the rain, he's talking, and he's saying, It's the strangest thing, to realize that you've suppressed a memory for all these years. I mean, it's the sort of thing you think only happens to failed actors in shoddy soap operas. And then, boom, you suddenly remember. But then it turns out that he's not talking to himself. He is in fact talking to the ghost of Pam, who we see in the second panel, I guess to show that normal people walking on the street would just see him talking to himself. And Pam turns to him and asks, What do you mean, Gav? Remember what? Which is kind of weird because in the last issue, it seemed like Pam was trying to get him to remember something. Maybe that didn't even happen, like she was trying to implant a memory in his mind, but now she doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. So Gavin begins to recall memories of that night that he had forgotten, and we get some panels that are flashbacks, and we get Gavin and John yelling at each other in the bar the night that Pam died, and Gavin is saying, I knew you wanted that bloody book, Constantine. God, you wouldn't have even known about it if I hadn't told you. And John screams back, Bollocks. I fucking paid for it, so it's mine. And then Pam grabs onto Gavin's arm and tries to pull him away, and she says, Gav, come on, love. It's not worth it. But as Gavin's about to go with her, John yells at her saying, Oi, this is none of your business, so fuck off, Pam, you fat slag. And that's too much for Gavin, so he lunges forward and punches John in the face and yells, You bloody toe rag! Then we see an angry John a little bit later, and he's looking at the two glasses of Gavin and Pam that are sitting unattended at a table nearby a pool table where the couple is playing billiards. So we see John kind of side-eye them, and then we see him walk over and pour something in one of the drinks. Then John goes over to sit down by Chaz and his other mates, and Chaz says, You all right, John? And as John sits down, he says, Yeah, no worries, Chaz. Problem solved. And this memory to me has to be fake because there's too many variables here. Like, how would he know that John spiked his drink when he was playing pool over there? Like, we get a direct shot from his memory of John pouring liquid into his drink from, like, above. So it doesn't make sense that he would have seen that. And also, this is different from the events that we saw in the last issue that he thought he remembered. So it seems like things are just being added to convince him more and more that John is the reason for Pam's death. And now it's not just that John got him drunk, but now it's John and him got into a fight, and then John would drug him, which would make him drive very badly and cause the accident that killed Pam. But it seems that Gavin is not putting those clues together. He's buying it hook, line, and sinker because I guess in his mind, these are his memories. And as Gavin has the realization about what he thinks John did, he says, It was so obvious, but I just locked it away. I didn't kill you. It was Constantine. And then Pam says, I've got faith in you, Gavin. I know you'll do the right thing. Then we turn the page, and we cut back to Dani's house, and it's nighttime now, and we see John and Grandpa going around to each of the rooms and checking on the people sleeping. And as John opens the door to Terrell's room, he says, You sure you're up for this then? And Grandpa replies, Just show me the dotted line. Then they go back down the stairs, and it seems like Grandpa's maybe having some trouble because he says, Should have known about you, son. Got that look about you. And John stops on the stairs and says, Oh yeah? How's that then, Gramps? And then they continue walking, And as Grandpa passes John at the bottom, he says, "I'm from Louisiana, son. You ever met my grandma, you'd understand. It's in your eyes." Then they walk into the kitchen, and we see a third person that is part of this group, and it is Lenny, the guy that was pretending to be disabled in the subway station, who also is some sort of psychic along the lines of Weeble. And as they walk in, Lenny looks kind of distressed, and he says, "Fuck, I can't believe I'm even doing this, man." And we see on the table that there are candles lit, like they're probably going to do some sort of magic or seance. And Lenny looks up at John pleading and says, "You said you'd fucking leave me alone, man. You fucking lied. I must be fucking mad." And then John lights a cigarette and says, "Mind your fucking language, Leonard." Then we see the grandpa sit down at the table next to Lenny, and on the table there are some pictures and what looks like a war medal of some kind. And as John goes to sit down, he says, "Come on, lads. Game's afoot. Best get on with it, eh?" And then the grandpa picks up a picture and says, "Did some rooting around to find you. Been a while." And then Lenny grabs his hand. It seems like Grandpa is concentrating as he still holds on to the picture. And then he says, "Okay, I got it. Let's go." And then Lenny looks up unassured and says, "John?" And then John jokingly quotes Star Trek, I believe, and says, "Make it so, Ensign." And then Lenny does his thing, and we see a bunch of purple lines of energy coming off of him and Grandpa, and Lenny's eyes get very wide and fill purple as well, and we see coming off of the items on the table, that's where the energy is mainly focusing. And then John's narration in regards to what he just said to Lenny says, "I always wanted to say that in a crisis." Then we see Lenny's head tilt back, and his eyes roll back into his head, and John's narration says, "This is a desperate ploy, mind, born out of desperation. But it's the only ploy I've got for the moment, as I've managed to determine the trick in situations like these is to go with the unexpected, and a less expected solution than the cluttered soul of some 80-year-old geezer is hard to imagine." So as Lenny's doing his thing, we focus in on Grandpa in the center of this black section, and he's kind of smiling, and around him is his whole entire family, and also images of him as a boy, and him with his wife, and his military uniform, and a flower. Basically all the significant things that he can remember happening in his life. Then we turn the page and we cut to Ethan's room, and he is dreaming, and the narration says, "Somewhere in a dream, Ethan turns, restless." Then we see what he's dreaming about, and I believe these are memories from the grandpa that they're sending to each of these kids, maybe to break whatever magic's afflicting them. So we see a young grandpa waking up in a single-room shack where his mother is comforting a baby by candlelight, and the narration says, "Thought he heard his little sister crying, but it can't be. She died last year of influenza. Must be Mom singing to little Joey, soft and beautiful and far away, like velvet in a store window." He thinks back to when Sis was still alive. Then we see the grandpa and his sister and a bunch of other kids playing kick the can in an alley, and the narration continues. "Kick the can. They used to run huge games down at Laterno Way. He never wanted her to play then, back before, when he thought she'd be his sister forever." Then we see the grandpa at school, and it looks like a very unruly school because there's a fight going on and the teacher's yelling at kids, but it also looks like it's in a broken down building, and the narration continues saying, "Before he found out, they don't give that medicine to just anyone, or school books, or bus rides, or much of anything if you don't look right." Then we see the boy grandpa standing on a street corner by a building, and we see a white family pass by, and the daughter in this family is eating an ice cream cone, and the narration continues, "One day, he thinks, it'll change. Life will be fairer, maybe. Maybe there'll be ice cream for everyone." Then we cut away from Ethan's dreams, and we cut to Edric, his twin's dreams. And now we see Grandpa as a young man in the military, and he is running with a bunch of other soldiers down a road in what looks like a sheep farm or something. Maybe this is in England where he was sent. And over this panel, the narration says, "Dead on his feet, 3 hours sleep in 3 weeks. When the invasion do come down, he's planning on sleeping through it. In the meantime, he's defending so-called freedom from somewhere called Wales. Ain't much of anything to defend, except a few whalers and a bunch of sheep. Up till now, he never even heard of the damn place. Pretty much wishes he still hadn't." Then these soldiers run by a fence where we see some young women watching the soldiers, and it seems like they're trying to flirt with them, and one of the girls turns to the other and says, "Ooh, I like these Yanks, don't you?" And then young man Grandpa runs by, and the girl that she asked the question to sees him and says, "Yeah, but I don't like much of the white fellers they brought with them." And then at the bottom of the panel, the narration says, "Then again." Then we turn the page, and now we're in Kyle's room where he is dreaming, and now we're seeing Grandpa as a soldier still, but now he's on a battlefield, and he's running and ducking for cover as bombs go off on a beach, so this is probably Normandy. And over these panels of him running across the beach and dodging bullets and bombs, the narration continues, saying, "Just as all hell breaks loose. Ain't nothing like the movies. That's the thing that strikes him the most. No one gets it nice and clean in the heart. Seen one guy get it in the teeth, one guy at the bottom of his foot, but no one ever clutches at their chest, and it's always messy. Somehow, he gets off a couple rounds at no one in particular. One for peace, one for freedom and the American way. A random bullet fired to defend each child he's going to have one day, lest the crazy bastards he's shooting at ever get their way." Then we turn the page and we cut to Grandpa, and the war is over, and he's coming back home, and he's walking down the street in uniform, and he's walking next to the woman who was watching him run in Wales. And we get a bunch of flashes of his life. We get that moment, then we get a moment of Jackie Robinson playing baseball, and then we see him and the grandma, and they're in the hospital room with their daughter, who is giving birth to the twins Ethan and Edric. Then we see Grandpa older now, and he is at the funeral of his wife, and then we see him sitting in the chair like always outside on the porch. And over these panels, the narration says, "Somewhere in the dream of his most important moments, the house stirs restless. He brings her back, that pretty Welsh girl, and trembles with embarrassment as he shows her all he has to offer. She sighs real quiet and lies about how fine it is. Warm October afternoon, crack, and Mr. Jackie Robinson hits a seeing eye single through the gap. The truest sportsman and gentleman to ever make the majors, and that's the truth. That wonderful, crazy day the twins are born. Everyone's busting up good, and the little guy's squealing like baby tigers. Last time his pretty Welsh girl ever did smile before she passed on. All in all, not a bad life. What you might call an object lesson in falling down and getting right back up again." Then we see Kyle sit up in a fright, and then him and Grandpa at the same time say, "Ah!" And it seems like whatever magically was happening has finished, because Grandpa adjusts his glasses and he says, "That's that then." And then he stands up and walks over to the stairs, and he says back to Constantine, "Wake me up when it starts working." And John is just kind of looking at him with awe, I guess because, this was a very taxing thing, and Grandpa did it like a champ. Then from behind John, Lenny says, "Constantine, you got a spare pair of pants I can borrow, man?" Because apparently he shit his pants during that whole thing. Then we turn the page and we cut to the next morning, where Dani is waking up John, and we just see her face over him, and she's saying, "Up and at 'em, sleepyhead." And as John gets up, she stretches and says, "Come on, babe. We only got 3 hours before the plane leaves." So John gets dressed and he comes downstairs, and as he's putting on his tie, he sees her making coffee, and he says, "Where is everyone?" And she answers, "Out. Fred took Mom to the mall, believe it or not. I know how you hate all that goodbye stuff, so I did it for you." And then John walks over to her and asks, "What about Gramps?" And Dani smiles and says, "Boys took him out fishing. Can you believe that? They all bust out of here at 6, happy as pigs and shit. God, you never can tell with those kids." And then she holds up an envelope and says, "You and the old man really hit it off, hey? He wanted me to give you this." So John takes the letter and opens it and reads it, and he's got a smile on his face. And then when we pull back in the next panel, we see they're at a bar at the airport. So I guess he waited to read it until then. Then we see Dani get up from the bar and walk away, and she says, "I need to piss like a racehorse." And John sarcastically says, "Cheers for the information." Then she leaves to go to the restroom, and then the bartender sets a glass of alcohol in front of John, and John looks at him and says, "Hold on, mate. I never asked for another one." And then the bartender says, "From that gentleman at the end of the bar, sir." And John looks over, and he sees the first of the fallen raising a glass to him and smiling. And then the first comes over to him and sits down and says, That was a bloody good effort on your part, Constantine. No doubt those boys are finally headed on the straight and narrow. Not that it'll make a difference in the long run, of course. You see, as yet, this disease of yours is somewhat akin to a mild case of the sniffles, but it's very virulent, and you little mortals are so wonderfully susceptible to it. And I believe the virus he's talking about is consumerism, which is what that IT logo is representing. And the First of the Fallen continues saying, I shall no doubt be laughing my cold black arse off when it inevitably deteriorates into full-blown pneumonia of the soul. And John looks down at his glass and says, I'd be careful if I were you. With any luck, it's catching. And the First replies, Oh, it is. I haven't had so much fun since the Romans rear-ended themselves a few millennia ago, and we all know what happened to them. You know, I hate to burst your bubble, Constantine, you being so bloody clever and all, but I was wondering something. Now that you've gallantly rescued the Three Stooges, what were you planning on doing for America's other 280 million? I mean, 3 cheers for the good college try and all that, but how are you going to persuade the rest of them to read a book? And then John angrily turns to him and says, I'm not. Everyone else can fuck off as far as I'm concerned. And the First mocks disappointment, saying, Oh, fie on you, John. That attitude's going to get you into trouble one of these days. Speaking of which, here. And then he hands John what looks like a business card, and it has the capital letters on it, FOTF. And as John stares at it, he says, I don't get it. What's this for? And the First makes a phone shape with his hand, and he says, Call me. And then he walks away from John and says, Trust me, you're going to want to soon enough. Then we turn the page, and we cut back to Gavin's flat, and this is like where the story actually began, in Gavin's house, where he's listening to his message machine over and over, and he has a gun in his hand, and the message machine is repeating, Hi, you've reached the answering thingy of Pam and Gavin. We're not around to take your call right now. Stop it, Gav. So leave a message. Then we see Gavin holding the gun, and he's pointing it at a picture that was taken of John, Chaz, Pam, and Gavin in the bar on the night that Pam died. And as Gavin stares wide-eyed at it, he points the barrel at John in the picture, and he says, Pow. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.